the first time I attended ISBACON was in 2014. We've come a long way since then. Renuka, maybe you could start by introducing yourself.
Sure. First of all, hello everyone. My name is Renuka Bodla. I'm a venture partner at Silver Needle Ventures, and I've been in the startup ecosystem as a mentor, working with IIIT Tech Fund, and also as an investor there, as well as a mentor in Hojis MedTech. And also I had been part of a couple of investment firms as well. But prior to that, I was a techie, hardcore techie, engineer and a software engineer, worked with various companies like General Electric, Cisco, Novartis, etc. And maybe I had a chance to work with the incubators more as from the consumer point of view. When I was working with one of the pharma companies, we did interact with some of the incubators, and maybe I'll share some of those experiences as well, Srini, as we go along.
Sure. Really nice to see a bunch of old and familiar faces, but it's equally exciting to see so many people that I don't know. Because again, back in 2014, we were a much smaller ecosystem. It did feel like every event we ran into the same people, which was good, but also kind of boring. Having said that, the ecosystem has grown drastically. The world has changed drastically. Very quickly, for those of you who don't know me, Srinivasa Kollipara, as Mr. Jayesh Ranjan mentioned, my claim to fame in this community is T-Hub. And before that, I ran the IIIT Incubator, as he mentioned. But I've been an entrepreneur myself. I've been in the biotech space. I've been in the software space. I grew up in England, worked in the US, done a bunch of different things, and brought all of that to the incubator at IIIT, which was one of 3, as he mentioned at the time. But things have changed drastically, as we mentioned. The number of startups in the ecosystem has gone up massively. Thanks to efforts of the government, as Mr. Jayesh Ranjan mentioned, as people like Mr. Ramanathan here contributed to. Of course, even before the government got involved, we had a few incubators, like, of course, Sign and a bunch of others. But the point is that what we are today and what we used to do will not fly in the world that we live in now. Expectations have changed. Founder expectations have changed. Investor expectations have changed, corporate expectations have changed. They're all looking at startups of maturity, startups that are solving real problems at scale. And as incubator heads, our job is to make sure we do those. I know even talking about the investor expectation, for example, Renuka, maybe you could talk about your experience with investment and what Silver Needle is looking at now versus what it used to be like back in 2014.
Sure. I just want to share a small anecdote to set the context. So what was in 2014 worked well then, maybe it may not work now, is what I would say. The reason being, I remember, just a small personal story. I remember when I was in my 11th grade, I still remember that all I wanted was some more illustrated textbooks, etc. But now my daughter is in 11th grade, and her demands are like, she wrote a script and she wants the book to be published. She wants to do an internship in one of the medtech startups. The generation is so ahead of what we were normally expecting. So the trend is all over the place, right? And similarly, if you see even the startup ecosystem, a lot of new generation kids are aspiring to join, and their demands are equally demanding, as I was telling about my daughter. So how do we cope up with that? I just want to share a few experiences from the investor point of view, is that definitely it helps the investor community to be in touch with some of the startups through the incubators. But a lot of times it could be most of the events that are conducted as panel discussions or pitching events, which are one of the events that happens. But for investing community to make a decision, it takes more than that one interaction. So it has to be deeper. Maybe we have to have more ways to connect with the startups, as well as have a more deeper conversations with them so that we can make a better decision. That is one of the things I felt. And the other aspect is definitely how best we could use the technology enablement there, because the traditional forms of the connect are not scalable, because now, as we said, there are more and more startups. How do we scale ourselves as an incubator also is one of the questions we need to address.
Okay, in fact, the other part that I wanted to address was you'd mentioned to me in the other room about what it was like as a corporate engaging with incubators as well. What was that experience like, and how do you think that's changing?
Yes, I think the biggest avenue that I think even Poini could relate to what I'm saying is that a lot of corporates are willing to work with the startup ecosystem. For example, I was part of a pharma company where I was heading their platform was also called BIOME, where the purpose is to interact with the tech ecosystem, especially the startup ecosystem, because a lot of times such companies have their own specific domain knowledge. They have lots and lots of millions of patient data, but they may not have the tech enablement. They don't pursue that in-house. And for them to have a jump start, they will definitely, and most of the companies are looking at the startup ecosystem to collaborate with, so that they could experiment in short time in a very frugal manner, and technology adoption is faster, right? So on that note, there's a huge opportunity where the incubators could play a role. But at the same time, the corporate expectations little differ, because one, how strong our PMO processes are is very important. A lot of time, maybe startups may not have the required resources to, manage that. Maybe the incubators can have that as a common service across, and then help those startups to work with some of these larger organizations. And the second one is on the technology fitment. To bring any new technology to a corporate is not an easy task, and it's very, very time consuming. So when you're experimenting, we cannot have the corporate ready with the new technology. So they need to create some of these experimentation, what do you call that, experimenting environments, so that they could do that and bring this corporate up to speed, so that they are aware of what architectural changes to be done by the time the experimentation is done. I think some of these are maybe demanding, but that will really help more collaboration, because there are big bucks in the startup, in the corporate world, so that the startups could leverage on the business access, market access.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the things that I want to address, and before I say the next set of things, because I understand that we have many incubators in the room, all are at different stages. Some are more advanced than others. All of you struggle with resources, and just like a startup would, right? You have limited resources, you have limited bandwidth, you have limits on the type of people that you have. I understand all of that. Having said that, I'm going to say a few things that I'd like you to consider, just from a perspective of how can we get better as an ecosystem. I think that what is required today is depth. Breadth has already happened. We've got, I believe, over 1,100 incubators in the country now. Thanks to people like Mr. Mittal, many things have changed on that front. You're able to hire better people, you've got a little more budget, but there's still a long way to go. The truth of the matter is that most people outside of the incubator ecosystem think of incubators as almost just co-working space plus. And that doesn't work. We have to do more. It has to be, how are we helping startups to scale? And I think you have to think about my viewpoint, right? When I ran IIIT, or when I ran T-Hub, or even now that I'm doing BIOME, which is my new venture studio that I'll talk about, every single one of those we approached from a startup mindset. We preach it to our portfolio companies, we preach it to our startups. Do we follow that ourselves? I think we need to. Our startups are our customers. Are we serving them in the best way that we can? Do we understand what they want? That's what I'm questioning always with BIOME, and I think all of us need to question that with yourselves. What do you think?
I mean, totally agree. I think there's a lot of puzzle pieces all over the place. I think that's it's time for us to integrate and go deeper, as you mentioned. And do you want to share some of your perspectives on what could be the ideal, environments in an incubator, maybe with the global standards? Would love to hear from you.
So I think before I address that one, there are two different lenses by which I want you to think through some of the things that we're saying. One is as an incubator, obviously. You're all running incubators, or most of you are running incubators, or associations to do with incubators. And so look at how can your incubator apply some of these principles, but the other part is how can you as an individual apply these as well, because the incubator will only do as well as you do. Technology has changed drastically, as we've said. Again, the truth is that a lot of startups are not utilizing that technology to its fullest extent. Can you help challenge them to do some of that? But you can only do that if you are aware of what's possible yourself. How many people in this room use Gen AI tools? Okay, quite a bit. You need to make sure that you're staying on top of this stuff. There's so much that's changing in that world, right? The ecosystem, to your question about how it's evolving, there are so many changes happening. Funds are now doing incubator programs almost, right? Incubator light. They're going earlier and earlier. Incubators globally are going deeper and becoming sector specific in some cases, and we have some of those, but maybe we need more. We have venture studios coming up. How many of you know what a venture studio is? A few of you. So a venture studio is essentially what we call institutional co-founder of companies. So it gets confused with incubation quite often because they're working with multiple companies. But the difference is that a venture studio will actually be a co-founder, will have people on its roles that build the company alongside either an early stage startup or a founder. But again, the point of all of these programs is depth. It's not just about volume anymore. It's not how many startups go through your doors. It's how many of them succeed. And we have to be tracking the success of our startups using tools, ideally. Yeah. There are new tools coming out that help you do that. But I'm not sure how many people are tracking their startups on a per startup metric basis and seeing how did they come in and how did they go out. I think you can't do that for all of your startups, but can you do that at least for the top few? Can you create certain programs that are at the base level, certain programs for people to qualify slightly longer that's a cohort based, and maybe even some one-on-one programs for your best ones? Because at the end of the day, you are competing against all the other incubators out there. We're all friends, we all cooperate, but we're also competing. And you need to be able to show that you've got startups that have succeeded. It's what you're doing for your customers.
So totally agree, and maybe it will be very cool if we have some alumni for some of the members, top performers, recognized. And as you rightly said, tracking the journey of the startup, it's not just about like if a tenure has ended in an incubator, I think you kind of unnotice them. Maybe it should be there should be a continuity, because that really helps us attract bigger investments as well, because it really gives a lot of confidence to the investor coming on board that okay, these are some nurtured and top performing startups. So I think there should be some way to have that collaborative effort, I would say, and more than how it is kind of disconnected, I would say. I think that would really help from my perspective.
Yeah, I think you need a series of programs that engage the ecosystem as well as your own startups. One thing I tell people, I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, because you're all in the ecosystem as well. But an ecosystem is not a flat thing. It is consisting of multiple stakeholders, all of whom are playing different games. Your corporates are engaging with startups for a different reason. Your investors are engaging for a different reason. Etc. You have to make sure they all win their games. Even mentors. Mentors are essential for us to help our startups to succeed. But how many of you are tracking the value that the mentor is getting out of it, as opposed to them just providing you free service? It doesn't work in the long run. Also, most startups don't want somebody coming and giving them some random gyan one time and then disappearing. They want to know, has this advice worked? If not, how do we pivot the advice even? So just a little more depth, I think, in terms of how you engage.
Yeah. And maybe a last closing remark for me is that how do you attract the top startups? Because I see a trend where they are shying away from some of these programs. They want to be more independent, and maybe they're seeing other opportunities that are working. How do we really attract the top talent in the startup ecosystem? I think that's something we really have to ask and cope up to the needs of the Gen Z requirements.
It's a really good question. Again, it goes back to that thing I mentioned at the beginning, which is the startup ecosystem is maturing. The quality of our founders is going up, the maturity levels they have. They want you to be able to guarantee some value, otherwise they're just not going to bother about it. And a lot of if you look at the number of unicorns we have, and then track how many of them came out of an incubator, it's quite sad. It shouldn't be that way. To your point, though, startups and founders are getting more selective for sure about who they work with. But we're a venture studio. We work with startups at the early stages. We take up to 20% equity, and we're seeing incredibly mature, very, very senior folks, repeat founders, unicorn leaders, all wanting to give away that equity. If you can prove your value, they will give it to you. But it's on you to prove your value, to really see not just what space are you giving or what connections you made or what sessions you did, but how did you impact their metrics, which is only about their customers, getting them investment, or fixing some fundamental things around maybe their team, all these sort of things. But it is about depth again. And if you have a few that have succeeded, then others will come to you.
Definitely. And depth and how we do that hand-holding continuously, I think that sustainability matters a lot.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.